You don't think you're selfish, neither do most people. If you ask almost anyone, they will tell you that they try to be fair, that they consider others, that they do what they believe is right. And most of the time that's true. But there is a condition hidden underneath that, because human behavior is not fixed. It is not stable across all situations. It changes depending on context, pressure, and opportunity. And that's where things start to shift. Because if you take a person who behaves reasonably well in everyday life, and you slowly begin to remove the constraints around them, something subtle begins to happen. At first, nothing dramatic, just small changes, a decision that benefits them slightly more than others, a justification that feels reasonable in the moment, a shift in how they interpret situations. And over time, those small changes accumulate. The line between what is fair and what is personally beneficial becomes less clear. Not because the person decided to become selfish, but because the environment allowed it. That is the key point. Selfishness is not always a fixed personality trait. It is often a response to a situation. Most people behave well because something is regulating them. There are consequences. There is social judgment. There are limits to what they can do. Remove those limits, and behavior starts to change. Not instantly, not dramatically, but gradually. And the more power someone has, the more those limits disappear. Now imagine a situation where someone has enormous influence. Millions of people are paying attention. Everything they say is amplified. Every decision they make has impact. In that environment, something else happens. Your identity becomes tied to your position. It is no longer just what you do, it becomes who you are. And when that happens, criticism is no longer just feedback. It feels like a personal attack. Opposition is no longer part of a system. It becomes something to defeat. And slowly, the way decisions are made begins to change. Not necessarily because of bad intentions, but because everything becomes personal. This is where public figures become useful as examples. Not because they are fundamentally different from everyone else, but because their behavior is visible at scale. Donald Trump is one of the clearest examples of this dynamic, not because he created these patterns, but because he expresses them openly. If you look at his communication style, there is a consistent pattern. Events are framed in terms of winning and losing. Trade deals are wins or losses. Media coverage is fair or unfair. People are loyal or disloyal. This kind of thinking is not unusual. Many people think this way in their personal lives, but when this operates at the level of a presidency, it starts to shape real-world outcomes. Because if everything becomes a contest, then success is defined by personal victory. Now consider the relationship with the media. When coverage is positive, it reinforces identity. When it is negative, it challenges it. From a psychological perspective, this creates pressure. And one way humans deal with that pressure is by questioning the source of the criticism. If the information threatens your position, it becomes easier to dismiss it as biased or unfair. This is not unique behavior. People do this all the time. They discount opinions that challenge them. They reinterpret information in ways that protect their beliefs. But again, at scale, the consequences are different. Now look at loyalty. In high-pressure environments, loyalty becomes extremely valuable. When someone is constantly facing opposition, they begin to rely more heavily on people who support them. Over time, this creates a shift. Agreement is rewarded. Disagreement becomes risky. And gradually, the environment becomes less balanced. This reduces friction. And friction is one of the mechanisms that normally correct behavior. Without it, decisions become more aligned with personal perspective. Another important example is how power interacts with resistance. When systems slow people down, most individuals interpret it as an obstacle. And if they have the ability to bypass that obstacle, they often will. Not because they are trying to undermine the system, but because they are trying to achieve their goals more efficiently. Again, this is normal human behavior. Now consider a more extreme situation, the 2020 election. From the outside, it appears as a political conflict. But from a psychological perspective, something more fundamental is happening. If a person's identity is tied to winning, then losing creates a contradiction. And humans are not comfortable with contradictions in their identity, so they resolve them, sometimes by adjusting their beliefs, sometimes by reinterpreting events. This does not require deliberate deception. It can happen as a natural psychological process. People protect their sense of self, and they do it in ways that feel justified from their own perspective. That is what makes this difficult to analyze. Because from the outside, it can look like selfishness or denial, but from the inside, it feels like consistency. It feels like defending what is right. This is why focusing on one individual misses the deeper point, because the behaviors being observed are not unique. They are amplified. They are what happens when normal human tendencies operate in an environment with fewer constraints and higher stakes. And this is where the uncomfortable part comes in. Because it is easy to look at someone in power and say, "I would never behave like that." But that assumption is questionable, because behavior is not only a function of character, it is also a function of environment. If you had millions of people supporting you, constantly reinforcing your perspective, if you were under continuous criticism from others, if you had the ability to override resistance and act according to your own judgment, would your behavior remain exactly the same? Or would it begin to shift? Would you become more certain in your views, less tolerant of opposition, more focused on outcomes that reinforce your position? These are not extreme possibilities, they are predictable responses. Because humans adapt to their environment. And power is one of the strongest environments there is. So when people point to figures like Donald Trump as examples of selfish behavior, they are not entirely wrong. But they are incomplete, because they are focusing on the individual instead of the pattern, and the pattern is the important part, because it exists everywhere. At smaller scales, in everyday situations, in workplaces, in relationships, in social groups, whenever someone has more control, more influence, and fewer consequences, similar dynamics begin to appear. Maybe not as visibly, maybe not as dramatically, but the structure is the same, which leads to the final question. Not whether someone else is selfish, but under what conditions you would be. How much power would it take? How much reinforcement? How little resistance? At what point would your decisions begin to align more with your own interests while still feeling completely justified? Because that is the defining feature of human selfishness. It does not feel like selfishness from the inside. It feels like the right thing to do. And that is why it is so difficult to recognize, not just in others but in ourselves.